as a leader, you've got to ask yourself, what's the change that's looming that I'm willfully ignoring? It's such a powerful question. And yeah, we sometimes willfully ignore the hard truth, which is, there's these few things I've got to go after. I think potentially we could, as leaders, build a better dashboard for the decisions that we make. And we could be saying, unless I'm hurting from saying no to 5 things per week, well, let's take a list of the 5 things that hurt most to say no to this week and keep track of that. And on a scale of 1 to 5, how much did it hurt? And reframe that as a bad thing to actually, well, this is a sign that I'm on the right track. So I think there's a way to reframe the things that we wish we could do.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today with Mark Dombkins. Mark, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Thank you. It's such a thrill to be here. And thanks for all you're doing in this space. We've learned lots from you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was saying to you before we hit record that this feels like one of the longest overdue conversations on What the Fundraising. And there's so much we could talk about today. But let's start with you just introducing yourself, your work, and what brings you to our conversation. And then we'll get into it.
For sure. Yep. So Mark Dombkins, I live in Wollongong in Australia. So it's kind of like what Santa Cruz is to San Fran is what Wollongong is to Sydney. On the coast, gorgeous spot. Live here with my wife, Anna, and our 6 beautiful kids, 3 of whom we adopted during our years living and working in Tanzania. So I'm actually a maths teacher by trade and was teaching at an international school over there. And Anna was a boarding parent. And during our time living and working there, we fostered and eventually adopted 3 more beautiful kids. And that was our connection to initially starting Forever Projects. And our mission is to end the Tanzanian orphan crisis through income creation for women.
Okay. I want to talk about, there's so many things we could talk about related to Forever Project, and we'll get into some of it. But I first actually kind of want to talk about your nonprofit leadership journey and some of the things. I'm really inspired by the way that you lead and the way that you sort of think about growth of your organization. So talk to me a little bit about what have been some of the hardest lessons along the way or things that you've really realized in terms of how that have led you to how you show up today.
Oh, so much there. A book in the back of your bookshelf by Seth Godin. He's been incredible for us. I'll talk a little about Seth and his leadership, but I think the principles that have really helped have been the naivety. As a maths teacher, who am I to even start this? And to really be clear on who our audience is. So, our story really started as adoptive parents, as I'd said, in Tanzania and asking ourselves, what would need to have changed in the lives of our kids, but also, 57 other kids we walked past that day. We started the fostering process who weren't going to a family. And fortunately, the team we adopted through was already piloting a project to keep women and families together through a really great intervention. And so we recognized early on that our role was to raise funds and awareness for the work, and the locally led teams could get on with it. But how do you kind of captivate people an ocean away with a story that they've never heard or whatever? And so we kind of initially connected with our friends and family back here just to kind of get some more funding for the project. And you don't want to show up to your friends and family and shake a bucket and say, hey, you should feel guilty for your privilege, give. So a great friend of mine, Ben, is an incredible designer, storyteller, helped us curate this first event with 16 beautiful stories of the pilot project in Tanzania. And we invited friends through our other friends' cafe. They said food and beverages on us, the event's on us. And we just said, hey, this is what we're seeing. And without taking you to Tanzania, the next thing we can do is tell stories. And here's some stories. Go around and we treated it like an art gallery and just give as you feel led. And people gave so generously that night, 16 grand, all the money went to the program. And then a year later, we invited that same group back and said, remember last year you gave generously, here's where your money went, and 16 new stories. So I think the first thing we learned through that experience and just seeing their immediate connection to here's where my money went and here's the difference that it made. We were okay, early on, that's something we need to hook into. And so that led us to starting Forever Projects, after those annual fundraisers. And really, I think the big thing we learned early through connection to work like Seth Godin's was my role as a leader is to make sure I'm very clear on telling that story. And then I'm surrounding myself with people who can do the things that I can't do that we need to do that they can do much better, e.g. storytelling, marketing, creative. So that was the first thing. And then I think the second thing was definitely around, who we're learning from. And so as we were just being aware of what are our current obstacles and who is solving them in interesting ways. And so a couple of years in, we needed some funding to kind of put some staff on and grow the work. We were getting some traction. And I heard Scott Harrison on a podcast, and he was talking about their 100% model and their well. And it just came right at the perfect time. I'm okay, we've got friends and family who trust us and they can see the potential. So we said, hey, there's this charity in the US, they've got a great business model. How about you become the well for us? We call them our core donors. And then you can fund the first couple of hires at Forever Projects and help us scale. And so I think that idea of, number one, getting great people around you, and number two, just be curious about the people around you in the space who you can learn from, who are already ahead and have solved that problem, has been like the two biggest lessons for me. I think that the main obstacle has been a couple of years in learning the hard way that you need to create future demand as well as convert existing demand for whether it's a non-profit or a for-profit business. And a few years in, we're like, oh yeah, up and to the right. And then, wait a minute, what's going on? And then looking under the hood and going, we haven't been building brand. We've been relying on those early adopters, and that kind of part of the curve is running out. Yeah, and I think that's kind of been the last couple of years of the season we've been in, trying to think about how do we captivate people who don't know us and bring them to the best reason to give. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to hold myself back from asking questions in a different direction, but there's so much in there that we could talk about. I'm curious, like, how you're thinking about that today. Like, how do you continue to kind of build community and demand and desire and help people be hand raisers, and sort of how you think about that in a way that feels like sustainable and manageable to you as a leader and to your team, and making sure that it's still core to who the organization wants to be.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think, again, learning from people in the space. Victoria Harrison ran it, and I think that's how we got introduced, was ran an incredible course called Critical Mass, and it was talking about that exact thing. And she had a line that I'll never forget, which was, instead of expecting donors to come and meet you where you're at, hey, here's the Tanzanian orphan crisis, you have to meet them where they're at. And I recognized that the stories we were telling and the kind of marketing activity, top and bottom funnel, was pretty, like, as an organization, self-centered. We were talking about the mission and not necessarily having the empathy to stop and go, what's it like to be a working professional in a cost of living crisis, raising a couple of kids, reading news that is mainly Western-centric and isn't really about the areas we exist in? And so how do we meet them where they're at and actually add value to them? And so the last 12 months have particularly been, we kind of also having a partnership with a VC firm, and they were talking about building their own brand and talking about community and events in real life activations and digital activity around that as a great way to grow awareness of them as a brand, as an investor. And so we're like, well, donors are like investors. How do we build that same principle? And so we started running events with that theme. So the first one we ran was called Collective Effervescence. And it was all around, that everyone knows that feeling of like holding hands with strangers, as Brene talks about, being at a music concert or at a football game where you look left and right, you don't even know these people, but you feel connected to them. So let's explore, like, what is that? And that feels really great about being human. And that's actually, when we're connecting with one another about something bigger than ourselves, that's something people are interested in. So we ran that event. We're fortunate to think about, when we think about like the assets as an organization that we have, we're fortunate to have built a great network with some thought leaders who are experts in their space. So we invited a panel of experts, and they then shared the topic with the network, and we had the empathy to know this is something they want to talk about. And in talking about it, it's going to be great for their brands, whatever businesses they're building. They then promoted the event. The room filled up with people who we'd never met, but we placed a bet that their people would be our people as well. And it was really like running like a podcast or an event where we almost like placed an ad about ourselves in the event we ran. We didn't really talk about much about Forever Projects. It was more like, hey, this is the community we're building. These are the topics we're exploring. We want you to leave feeling connected, to feel joy and hope, and maybe have a new insight about this particular topic. And we just trusted that they would leave going, wow, who brought that together and where can I get more of it? So that was the kind of first one we did. And then we just committed to running those month in, month out with those three goals. At the end of each event, someone would leave feeling joy and hope, new connections, because, in real life connections to people that are aligned are increasingly scarce, therefore going up in value, and some insight they may have been kind of searching for that was meeting them right where they were at that stage of life, maybe as a working parent or someone who's feeling a bit lonely. And we've seen over time people who had no idea about us becoming connected to us and then wanting to know more about what we're about. Yeah, but because of the way we met them where they're at. Yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting. First of all, I love the asset-based approach of like the stacking of, this is just so similar to my model, like understanding the assets that you have, connecting if those assets are people, influential people or people with a certain amount of knowledge, like using that empathy to like bring out the best in them and what they really care about, and designing around those experiences when you know that they match or you believe that they match with like who your people are, right? And there's a certain amount, like you took a big risk. Like people could have gone to that event and like left feeling great, but like not cared at all.
Yeah,
Put
that's
it
right.
together. Or certainly not cared to learn more about it. You know, they could have been like, okay, like that was cool. So tell me about like as the leader went into you kind of like backing yourself to take that risk. And like you had a certain amount of conviction, but there was a lot of uncertainty there.
Yeah, there was. And I think because we were kind of brought to a position, as I'd said earlier, where we recognized we need to grow brand and future demand and we need to do it lean. Like we were at a place where we were ready to explore that because we needed to. You know, we couldn't just continue going back to the same database. We needed to grow the bucket. And Brady Josephson at Charity Water has been talking a lot about this in their journey. So even seeing more established charities going through it, I think gave us permission to say, well, if they're with those resources wrestling with this issue, then who are we to not be as well? I think also it helped that, like I said, we had that partnership with that VC. One of our new directors, Jess Walker, was the head of community and programs at this, one of Australia's three biggest VCs. And so she was helping us think about this strategy at that stage as a volunteer at the VC. And in joining our board, she was then, you know, one of our key decision makers was saying, yeah, this has worked. We believe it's going to work. So I think that's important as well. Like making sure that who you're accountable to as a leader are aligned in that kind of risk appetite. Both the risk appetite's important, but also aligned in strategy. And I think with small nonprofits, where we think about moving from maybe a more friends and family board of directors to a more independent board, we've got the opportunity to do that really strategically and mindfully. And if at the end of the day, like we were able to, as I said, look at the assets we have people who, the leaders, they're not going to lose by coming to this event because they get to talk about a thing they believe in, a philosophy that's going to add value to their business. So that's going to be a win for them. The venues that we're using are these spaces where they're looking for nonprofits to partner with and hold events, and they're hungry for that. So we could show up and say, hey, we'll solve your problem and we can bring community here and you can talk about the good you're doing with your space. So the cost was very low, get some drinks and so on donated. And if everyone left and no one then wanted to kind of, you know, find out more about us, like, the agenda wasn't to convert them. The agenda was to delight them. And holding true to that outcome, go, okay, did they leave feeling, as I said, joy, connection, hope, a new insight? If we've done that, let's just test and trust that that'll work its way back to us. And if it doesn't, we haven't lost because we've given. And I think having just returned from Tanzania, like the thing we love about that culture and developing cultures and emerging markets is they live in a world of scarcity, but they have an abundance worldview. Whereas we in the West have abundance, but we sometimes live with a scarcity worldview with this agenda of like, okay, I'll give or I'll do this thing, but I'm expecting something back. So it's also part of our brand and kind of representing the people we're serving to show up with that abundance and say, we might not get anything out of this, but that's not the point.
Okay, so you're hitting on, I think, this like true underlying tension almost in how we as a sector approach certain types of donor acquisition, or not even just acquisition. I mean, like large gift conversations, or we say we want to just get to know the person, but underneath our intention is quite different, right? And so then throughout the whole conversation, we feel this like inconsistency, like inside ourselves, that then creates this awkward meeting because we have this intention that we haven't said out loud, but we're holding it. And then it leads to this like, you know, really, really problematic experience for both the donor and the fundraiser. Like, I think this is one of the main things that dysregulates fundraisers and makes them feel like, makes fundraising feel so bad. And you're talking about it on an event scale, but it's coming back to the same issue, which is that I'll often say like, alignment can't just be a strategy. It needs to be your intention. Yeah. Like anyone can send an email saying, we're looking for aligned partners. But like, if you are not truly looking to figure out alignment, that is going to be a felt experience. And that we as a sector need to be investing more in the leading indicators and period. And then believing and knowing that those leading indicators over time do result in the lagging indicators we're looking for. But if we're doing the leading indicator with thinking about the lagging indicator, we're breaking it. And you're sort of like double clicking on that in so many ways. So tell me what you think.
Yeah, I think I love the lead versus lag indicator reflection there. And so I think about like, if you could reverse engineer that and go, okay, what would the obstacles be for us not having the ability, capacity to actually go after that lead indicator and trust the lag will come, or test, as we said earlier, test that the lag will come. And I think if I think about in my experience, some of the obstacles that get in the way would be, as I said, governance. who am I as a leader accountable to? So I've got a board meeting I'm preparing for next Friday. In the CEO report, there's a whole bunch of things that we've agreed that I'm accountable for. But we, as founding directors, made sure that the new directors, as I said, were risk loving and would be open to kind of growing a charity in this way. So I think that's one thing. Another thing I think is, what's the pressure that we're feeling on delivering funds to our partners in the short term? And that's really hard, especially in the current economic climate and what's happened with USAID and all the rest. So we've made strategic decisions to say to our existing partners in Tanzania, we're not looking at growing beyond this group. We're going to forecast as best we can with multi-year kind of giving, but we're not going to kind of make a promise we are scared we can't deliver on. We're going to kind of be able to send funds once the funds have come in, and that doesn't necessarily help them as much as we'd like with their forecasting and planning. But through painful experience, like having been confident that money was going to come in and it didn't, and then going, oh gosh, I've got to make sure we deliver on that promise. You then go into short-term hustle mode to get those funds versus the consistent commitment to the lead indicator. So in my experience, there are things that have gotten in the way in the past of really sticking to that lead indicator, the governance, and then just being careful about who you commit your fundings to. And the third thing actually I would reflect on would be, as a leader, the validation you get from being able to say, this year we sent X to Tanzania. And particularly with a 100% model going to our core donors, like the well equivalent for charity water, and saying, this year we sent less than the previous year, and here's why. And there was one particular update I'd sent to that group. We sent like an annual video update and have a gathering where they can grill us as leaders. There was one moment I really, felt like people might leave here because we've actually sent less 2 years in a row than we had the previous years. And so some executive coaching really helped me work through that as a leader, to say, I have permission from our board and from our local partners to execute on this strategy. And if any of our core donors are uneasy with this, we would say, thank you so much for your generosity. We totally understand. Here's a more established charity that's probably going to give you more reliability, and be willing to say thanks and all the best. And personally, as a leader, that's really hard. So I think being able to separate your own identity from the short-term success that we feel, I think that runs deep for nonprofit leaders and all leaders. Yeah.
And what happened? Yeah,
I was surprised that when we sent that, I think one person who actually was on the list but hadn't given, they kind of churned an annual donation and then said, actually, I'm out. And they were already not giving. And that was the only person to say no. Other people said, we love the transparency. We put a bet on you all when this was all very early days. We continue to trust you. And so it was both surprising and so affirming and validating. And I think a reminder that so many of the obstacles as leaders that we face are in our own heads. And, the noise that you hear at 4 a.m. when you wake up and you're like questioning what you're doing and questioning if it's the right thing. It's sometimes good to test that and realize it's okay. Yeah.
And what did that do for your leadership? Like in terms of how you trust your donor community to come along with you? Like, how did that change you as a leader?
Yeah, we'd already started testing that strategy with events and so on that I talked about earlier, but it gave me even more conviction and belief in myself and our team and our strategy and the new board, and let's just go after this. And I think much more permission to say no to things that maybe in the past I may have said yes to. I think the other thing that was really helpful with that coaching that I did through that period as a leader was not just the kind of how do you separate your own sense of validation and identity from the thing you're building, but also what are the saboteurs that get in the way. And for me, it's like, if I go to a restaurant and I see a menu, I want to go, hey, let's all share so we can all try everything. And I see that in my leadership where I'm like, oh yes, this looks good, this shiny thing. And having the self-awareness to go, that can be a strength, but also a shadow. And I need to get better at saying no to most things and yes to these few things. So it gave me that also. I think that self-awareness combined with the validation made me just go, let's say no to these things, because we've got the trust from our donors and from our board to go, yes, put a big yes bet on this other stuff.
Okay, you're talking about this piece that I think is super important here. So the thing that's coming up for me as you're talking about this is that I hear from nonprofit leaders a lot is, well, I don't want to miss opportunities, right? Like I have to say yes to everything because I don't want to miss opportunities. And my response to people is always like, you have to miss opportunities. Like there is literally no way to not miss opportunities. And if you don't consciously choose your opportunities, then you are unconsciously having things fall through the cracks and probably missing the more important ones. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. It's like the opportunity cost piece. And one of the things in Seth's Ultra MBA he talked about was the opportunity cost. There's this great quote where he says, as a leader, you've got to ask yourself, what's the change that's looming that I'm willfully ignoring? It's such a powerful question. And yeah, we sometimes willfully ignore the hard truth, which is, there's these few things I've got to go after. I think potentially we could, as leaders, build a better dashboard for the decisions that we make. And we could be saying, unless I'm hurting from saying no to 5 things per week, well, let's take a list of the 5 things that hurt most to say no to this week and keep track of that. And on a scale of 1 to 5, how much did it hurt? And reframe that as a bad thing to actually, well, this is a sign that I'm on the right track. So I think there's a way to reframe the things that we wish we could do, because as you say, there's a long, long tail of things that could be good, but they're not great. What's the saying? Good's the enemy of the best.
Yeah. I actually think it's rooted in that same scarcity mindset that you were talking about, right? Where like, if we don't start all these opportunities that are coming, like there won't be another, and I remember when I was starting my business, I would hear my brain be like, this is your chance, like this is your shot. And I made a commitment to myself, like early on, like that I was never going to believe that, like that every time I heard that voice, like I was never going to believe that this is like my one chance, my one opportunity. Cause like life isn't like that, and you make more opportunities, and especially with like intentionality and clarity. And I will say, like in my leadership too, like I get excited very easily, and I could totally be the person who just wants to do a million things. And there are probably people listening to this laughing, being like, you do too many things and you're not wrong. But like emissions, we have like a framework inside Practivated for like, what are we not doing? And like the emissions. And that is actually, that list is more important than my task list. Like, it's like the things I am saying, I will not do these things. I will not spend time here. I will not entertain this conversation. I will not have this meeting. And how that trickles down to my team. Like, they'll be like, Mallory, can you send me this thing? And I'll be like, nope, we shouldn't be doing it. And I'll be like, I love you. And I care about you. And I know you want me to just solve this for you. But instead, we're going to all sit in the discomfort of not taking action, and we're not doing it. And I feel like that has, for me too, been like the most transformative, like growth for me, and the way it's impacted my team and things like that.
Yeah. And I think related to that too, you bring, when you talked about like, sending the team are eagerly wanting something, there's part of one of the other saboteurs that came up when I did this exec coaching was people pleasing. And that people pleasing where there's an idea that maybe someone in your team has, that's the shiny new thing. It's not I get number one, excited because, oh, here's this new thing, like another item on the menu. And number two, a tendency to go, oh, I don't want to let you down. And in combination, they're deadly. And so again, having a self-awareness piece to go, I can see that ahead of time now and say, I want to please your future self, not your current self. As a maths teacher, I always talk about that with students. If they say, do I have to do homework? You get to do homework. Your future self is cheering you on, like, and trying to, which person are we pleasing, the present or the future, both for ourselves and for our team and our donors and that. Yeah.
It's such a good exercise. I do that a lot with travel, like, because in the moment I'm like, oh my gosh, that speaking opportunity, I want that. And then I like take a step back and I'm like, okay, that's during my daughter's last week of school. Yeah. That's like, go there, Mallory, and decide, like, does that version of you actually want this? And then you can like transfer that protection piece to sort of a different moment. It's so helpful. And I think I didn't know you had gone through that executive coaching phase, but I think that is just such a nice, like a really important piece of this, because everything that you're talking about right now requires a level of self-awareness, but also willingness to be uncomfortable. I actually think like the number one nonprofit challenge is that we are not taught how to be uncomfortable. So many of us are people pleasers, perfectionists, like high achiever, like all the things. And we come into this work, we want to do good. We want to make people happy. We have all these people to please also. Like, it's like there's just so many constituents. And because of course, like everybody wants to be liked, like I think at our core, like the most tender parts of ourselves are like create harmony, build community, these things that we really like, we want, and the people we want to be. And it took me a long time of like unraveling that I can be like a kind person and not do a 15-minute brain picking call with every person who DMs me on LinkedIn. Because if I did that, I would actually spend 70 hours a week doing those calls.
That's
And
it.
it was like a real tension though. I was like, oh no, like I'm not kind anymore. I'm not helpful anymore. And so I just think you're bringing up this really important point, which is like good things come from discomfort a lot of the time, and being able to sit in the discomfort long enough to get to the other side of it, as
Yeah.
opposed to just giving into that shiny object that allows us to flee the discomfort that we aren't doing enough or we aren't doing the right thing, but isn't really where we're trying to go.
Yeah, I love that. And that the embrace of discomfort reminds me of another topic we've been exploring. And we talked about the monthly events. That these are topics that as nonprofit leaders, if we have the empathy to understand and have this self-awareness to understand that this is something I'm struggling with, then there's lots of other people, e.g. in the kind of space we're trying to grow in the Australian tech ecosystem, and philanthropists within that space who are also going through it. So let's explore this topic. I'm going through it. I could just invite these thought leaders around and have a conversation, but why would I not share those insights with people that I care about in our community? And so, yeah, I think it's another thing of just as a leader, we can kind of go, yeah, what are the things as a business or as a leader that we're currently facing and exploring and curious about, and how do we share those insights more widely and trust that they are value to not everyone, but of a certain group of people. And we just, like I said, we just came back from Tanzania. We did our first official kind of Tanzanian immersion trip for leaders in this ecosystem. And the whole pitch was, who's this for? It's for leaders who want to level up, embracing discomfort in service of others. And so if you want to kind of go to Bali and sit on the beach, that's fine. That's nothing wrong with that. But this leadership immersion trips for people who are going to level up in the discomfort kind of purpose way. And so that was incredible to kind of have that. We tried to run that trip 12 months ago and we just didn't have the connections to kind of fill the trip. It's a big ask for someone to kind of go, I'll give you 2 weeks as a leader in another country. And, it's not cheap. The monthly events that I talked about, we'd been running, I think it was like a third of the participants we attributed from those events. So it's nice to kind of see being on safari with them after we'd visited the impact partners and going, I met you at this event in Melbourne, or I met you at this event in Sydney. And that was nice validation to go, I know what was the pain of trying to run this trip and it not getting up because we didn't have the audience, and then being on the other side of that kind of chasm and seeing it at work. So yeah, but yeah, great topic on discomfort for sure.
Okay, I know we're out of time, but I have one question that I have to ask now, which I hope it's okay that I'm asking.
Yeah.
Something that's really coming up for me hearing all of this and this connection between events and these trips is that there might be, and I hope you don't take this to mean anything negative about Forever Projects at all. But to me, what strikes me, we often think about donors and we think about them as being kind of really proactive prioritizers of their giving, right? They're like, okay, these are the 5 things that I care about, and I'm going to give to these 5 organizations in descending order or whatever, based on these like global issues that I really care about. My guess is that some of the folks that you're bringing into the fabric of Forever Projects right now never would have put the work that you do in their top 5 priorities, which I think speaks to this desire that people have, or like this kind of flip of what giving is really about into like the identity of the person, the community they want to be a part of, like that it's a place that sees them, that cares about the same things as them in more ways than just what the organization does. And so there's so many things. I mean, as a human being, there's probably like 500 different causes that I really do care about, right? And like how things surface to the top is based on my lived experience in the moment, what I'm exposed to, what the people around me are talking about. And I think what you're demonstrating here that is so interesting to me is like what it really looks like, not to convince somebody who cares about animal rescues that you're the right animal rescue, but to say people who care about these core fundamental components of being human, who want experiences like this, you belong here.
Yeah, you've said it so well. I 100% agree. I think I heard Scott Harrison on a podcast at some point talking about how so many of their big 8-figure donors to the well, the number one kind of motivator for them is the innovation that Charity Water is bringing. And it could be innovation to the water crisis. It could be innovation to homelessness. He doesn't feel like a lot of them really mind about the cause, but it's more about the way they're doing it. Yeah, and I think what you talked about with culture is really important. Seth says, it's his famous definition of culture is people like us do things like this. So if people I love that. So when people in the Australian tech ecosystem are thinking about giving, they look left and right and go, well, people like us do things like what? Well, we're generous. and we're globally minded. And I think, one of our core donors, a guy named Craig, works at one of the VCs, and I was kind of talking early days about this Tanzania trip, and he's incredible. He gives founders feedback all the time, pretty brutal. He's like, Mark, I can go down to my travel agent or go online and get a trip to Tanzania easily, probably cheaper than this, and go with people that I actually know. So why would I go on your trip? And he was grilling me. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great question. So we thought about what's the kind of unique value that this trip brings that something else might not. So when we were kind of going out to, back to your question, the potential participants in the trip, it wasn't, hey, come and learn about the orphan crisis. We can give you firsthand access. It was, this trip is going to be, as I said, a way to level up as a leader, outside your comfort zone, remarkable places and people, leaning into purpose, Kilimanjaro summit, boutique safari, and we gave them access to the local tech ecosystem. They're interested in kind of seeing ecosystems in East Africa that are kind of emerging. And you'll also connect with the work of Forever Projects. And you'll also, at the end, like that was the last part of the pitch. And so, a lot of people came for those reasons and were like happy they didn't disagree with our cause, but they kind of having firsthand access to it, fell more in love with it. And I think the other thing that's interesting is so many people now that have kind of come into our orbit. We've had a couple more monthly donors signing up on the back of these participants coming back and sharing their experience. Vic talks about people give to people, not causes. So they don't know what Andrea is raising money for. She's 5 and she's summiting Kilimanjaro. They're like, good grief, how are you doing this at that age? I'm in awe of your bravery and generosity. I'm giving. And she raised 30 grand. That's like another 20 women in the next 12 months that will join the 12-month program because of her. And they didn't know about For a Project before. And now we can, on the back of the trip, we can send emails to that donor group, and the first email will be, here's how you made Andrea feel at the top of the summit. Because she was in a dark place at like 4 a.m. at 5,700 meters. And she said, I remembered why I'm doing this. And this is challenging, but nothing like the challenge of poverty for these women. And in her words, we'll connect with her donors and introduce them to the cause, and then just test again. Do those comms work? Does that add value to the people that are in her audience? And so I could riff about that all day, but definitely important to recognize that, these causes are incredibly important to us, but they're not yet important to most people. And it's the yet that we can kind of just play around with. Yeah.
I think like the other thing I'm really taking away from this is like for organizations to figure out who they are, like, and not just what they do. Cause I think we lean a lot on like what we do and like everything I'm hearing is like, wow, like it really matters who you are. And that especially if you're working to like build community or bring new people in, like, of course you want to make sure that they're going to be aligned, or at least that you believe that they like could be aligned. But that probably what makes those invitations like feel the way they do is because you know really who you are and the types of spaces you're trying to create and the values you want people to feel in those spaces. So, okay, we could talk forever. Thank you for going over with me. There's so much in this conversation that I think will be so helpful for everybody listening. And I'm just so grateful for the way you show up and for your voice in this space and the work that you're doing. So thank you so much. Tell folks where they can go to connect with you, to get involved in Forever Projects, like leave them with those nuggets.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm personally just active on LinkedIn and love just sharing different things I'm learning and pointing people to different aspects around building leadership and brand and community. So you can find me there. And then foreverprojects.org is where you can find out more about our cause.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, so grateful for you.
Thank you. You too. Have a great day.